Sometimes when you go into your doctor's office, you and you alone are going to be your best advocate. Your voice is not being heard, you're not being met where you are. Ask. Always, always, always ask questions. And if you're not getting them answered, keep asking them or ask them of somebody else.
Access to care should not depend on my socioeconomic status or race.
It will help me, but it's going to help somebody else down the line. Somebody had to participate in a clinical trial in order for me to get the round of chemotherapy that I got.
Clinical trial diversity. Nothing about us without us. And guiding this next discussion, clinical trial diversity, is Kemi Williams, a seasoned clinical research executive with over 23 years in the biotechnology industry. At AstraZeneca, she leads the Clinical Trial Diversity Initiative. Kemi has driven clinical excellence at major biopharma companies like Roche, Abbott, and Medtronic. And Kemi continues to shape the field through discussions like this one that we are about to have today. Also joining Kemi on this panel, Dr. Sonia Reed, Assistant Professor in Hematology Oncology at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Dr. Reed's research tackles health disparities in breast cancer, focusing on genomic differences and improving healthcare delivery to underserved communities. She is also involved in breast cancer research in Jamaica and has received the Martin Luther King Jr. Award for her work in diversity, inclusion, and equity. And finally, Denise Lee, a retired attorney and lung cancer survivor. After her experience with a life-changing diagnosis, Denise has become a passionate advocate for early detection and personalized treatment. Celebrating 6 years cancer-free, she inspires others through her work with several organizations. Please welcome Kemi Williams, Dr. Sonia Reed, and Denise Lee.
Good morning, everyone. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to be here as we delve into a very important topic that I consider very timely and critical. Clinical trial diversity, nothing about us without us. Here with me today are our amazing panelists, Dr. Sonia Reed with the Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and Ms. Denise Lee, who is a lung cancer survivor and a patient advocate. Both of them will share their powerful stories navigating the clinical trial process, cancer screening process, as well as cancer treatment process. Our goal is to be able to shed the light on the importance of early detection and clinical trial participation for our Black and Brown communities, with a goal that by the time you leave from this discussion today, we would have highlighted the opportunities and challenges that exist for our community in the cancer care continuum. So now, to kick off, can you guys hear me clearly? Lovely. To kick off our session, I will start by asking Dr. Reed to please share the role that cancer screening play in the treatment of patients diagnosed with cancer.
That's an amazing question, and I think we have been addressing it all morning so far. But when we think about cancer screening, what we're really trying to do is find cancer before a patient has symptoms, right? So we're trying to find cancer before you even have a symptom, essentially trying to catch it at the earliest stage possible, because we know that early detection saves lives, right? And I think we have heard several different stories depending on cancer type. I think earlier we heard about colon cancer, for example, where we know that the standard age for screening is 45. However, what I always want to tell patients, we have to then tailor it to that individual based on your family history and based on risk factors, right? So how do you know that? How do you parse that out? I think it really starts with having a primary care doctor, right? Like if you don't have a primary care doctor that can guide that discussion, a doctor that you're seeing once a year when you're healthy, not just when you're having a symptom or you're not feeling well, that doctor can really sit with you Find out what that family history is. Find out if you have a risk factor. Are you a smoker? Have you been a smoker in the past? And do you then need lung cancer screening? And then that doctor can sit with you and say, okay, based on your age or based on your family history or risk factors, this is the screening that we need to do this year, and this is how frequently we need to repeat said screening. So I always say the first part of actually getting optimal screening is making sure you have a primary care doctor. And I know in the Black and brown community, sometimes that's a simple thing, but sometimes some patients just don't have doctors. They access the healthcare system when they have a symptom, and I think we're really trying to change that course. That way everybody has a doctor that they trust, that they can go into once a year. That way they can get tailored screening based on their history.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that great insight, Dr. Reed. So, assuming someone gets screened, we picked up a positive signal. What do you think clinical trial play? What role does it play in the treatment option for such a patient?
Clinical trials, I believe, I think it was said earlier, but clinically, I treat patients with breast cancer. So I'm a breast cancer oncologist, so this is what I do day in, day out. And on the research side, I'm involved in breast cancer research, right? So just to give that context. But when I think about clinical trials, I really think that's that avenue where you're able to test different advances, whether it pertains to prevention, detection, or treatment, right? So clinical trials can span that continuum where we have different clinical trials testing new guidelines for screening, testing different tests, and trying to figure out, can we do a better test? And then figuring out drugs. Is there better drugs that can treat this cancer better with possibly even less side effects, right? And the other key thing when we think about clinical trials is clinical trials can give one access to therapies even before they're approved, right? So I always say the standard of care that we know today was a clinical trial yesterday, right? And sometimes that is some, critical information because today you got diagnosed with cancer. Who knows if you're going to be able to get that therapy when it's approved maybe 5 years down the line, and that could be the next drug, so to speak, right? So being able to get access to that drug is really critical when you're starting to think about getting in on the hot drug that is now available.
Thank you so much. So Miss Lee, I would love to invite you into this conversation as well. Can you share a little bit about your diagnosis and how you felt when you heard the news?
Well, my diagnosis, I'll tell you what happened. I always say, or I like to say, that a billboard saved my life, and literally that is what happened. I was driving home from work, stuck in traffic. I look up, and there I see a billboard. And the thing that attracted my attention was the woman depicted on the blackboard was a black woman. And she was standing next to what I now know to be a CT scan machine. And the message on the billboard said, if you currently smoke or quit within the past 15 years, this test could save your life. I had never heard of anything like that before, but I knew that I qualified because I had quit smoking within the year. I went to my primary care physician. I said, I saw this test on this billboard. She says, you don't qualify. She pulled out the guidelines. She said, I didn't qualify. I said, well, I started smoking when I was 14. I quit when I was 54. I was 40 years. I think I qualify. And she said, no, according to the guidelines, you don't qualify. So I went back for an unrelated reason 3 months later. In the meantime, I did research. I got additional information and found out that, in fact, I did qualify. So I went back the second time. I said, by the way, I took this exam, and it was online. I said, I took this exam, and the exam says I qualify. I want you to reorder that test. I want you to order that test. And she pulled out the guidelines, and it showed that I then qualified. So she ordered it. And I took the exam, and the next day I got a call from a pulmonologist saying, we need to see you immediately in the office. What I first felt was when I was told, I said, I'm going to die. And because lung cancer didn't really have a great reputation as far as recovery was concerned. And I think what amplified it for me was I had just retired from my job. I retired at 55. I had all of these things that I wanted to do. I had just come back from a 6-week vacation, took the test, and the next day they called me and said, "We need to see you in the office." And I was diagnosed on Valentine's Day. So I was in a great state of fear, a lot of fear.
Yes, I can imagine what that was like. And I'm thankful that you're here now to tell us your story. Now, I understand you had an opportunity to be part of a clinical trial as part of your care. Can you tell us what motivated you to join a clinical trial and what your overall experience was as a trial participant?
Well, I first became aware of the whole arena of clinical trials with my dad. My dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer when I was in law school, so 35, 40 years ago. And 25 years down the line, his cancer had grown, it had spread, and treatment options for him were limited as far as a cure. And so they talked to him about a clinical trial. Now, you know, my dad was old school. He was born and raised in the South, pre-Jim Crow era, and he did not trust doctors, and he did not want to be, quote unquote, experimented on. And my sister and I had to keep talking. Well, Daddy, this is what it does. Daddy, a lot of people do this. Daddy, 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 Daddy. And by the time we got him to the point where it was something that he would consider, he no longer qualified. So that was my first introduction to clinical trials. As far as my own personal experience with it, the person who mentioned clinical trial to me was my oncologist. I was midway through my chemotherapy because I had surgery. I had my upper left lobe removed. I had 17 lymph nodes removed, or 18 or whatever. I had a course of chemotherapy. After my second round of chemotherapy, my oncologist said to me, you know, I think you qualify for this clinical trial. Would you be interested? And I didn't think that I qualified for any because my lung cancer was found at a very early stage thanks to early detection. It was found at a stage 1B. And so I didn't think that I qualified for anything. And then he mentioned it to me, and that's how I got involved in the clinical trial, was my oncologist. And I'll tell you, I fell in love with my oncologist at that point because he mentioned it to me, so it led me to believe that he was looking out for me. Yeah.
I am so glad you highlighted that. You know, research has shown us that one of the reasons we don't have enough Black and brown people in clinical trials is because no one invited them to join. And so to have an oncologist that thought about you, shared all your options with you, that is amazing. So now that you've been part of a clinical trial, and based on your experience, what would you conclude the difference between how you felt as a person before you joined the trial and now how you feel about the clinical trial process now that you've been through it?
I didn't have any problems agreeing to participate in the clinical trial. And I think, once again, that was because my fear was taking over. I wanted it out, the tumor. I wanted anything that looked like it could possibly be a cancer cell out of my body. I just wanted it gone. And actually, when my oncologist had mentioned to me the 4 rounds of chemotherapy, I said to myself, okay, well, what about 6? Because if 4 is good, 6 has to be better. But apparently it doesn't work that way. So, so when he mentioned the clinical trial, I was all in for it for a couple of reasons. One of the advantages of the clinical trial was even if I didn't get selected to get the drug, I would get 10 years of observation. And that's what I really wanted, was to make sure that I wasn't forgotten about. And since I did get the medication, I'll tell you, one of the interesting things that I discovered was that when you're in a clinical trial, they pamper you. They give you any and everything that you want. They follow you. They I actually had a dedicated person to call anytime I had any questions. I didn't have any side effects, really. I mean, they were minimal. So I found it for myself to be an incredible experience. And it became even that much more incredible when I found out, I'd say 6 months ago, that the clinical trial I participated was approved by the FDA for treatment. That was really, really, that's what for me, that's what it was all about. It will help me, but it's going to help somebody else down the line. Because when I think about, my cancer journey, clinical trials, somebody had to participate in the clinical trial in order for me to get the round of chemotherapy that I got. Somebody had to try that out first, and I benefited from that. So I was happy. I was honored. I was blessed to be able to participate in the clinical trial, and it was a wonderful experience for me.
Great, and I'm glad that you highlighted the type of resources that become available to patients when they participate in clinical trial, because it's important to start to understand what support systems are available. I do have a question around, was it easy for you to fit your clinical trial visits, going for your testing into your daily life, or were there other accommodations you needed to make?
Well, it was actually easy for me because I participated in the clinical trial at the same place where I got my chemotherapy, the same infusion center, the same research individuals, the same oncologist monitored me. So for me, it was just like going from chemotherapy to immunotherapy, which is what I received. There was some question at the very beginning whether my insurance company was going to pay for my scans, but I didn't have, for my scans for the clinical trial, but there was not an issue with that. So that was just my experience. It wasn't that much of an adjustment because I was just continuing to go to the same place.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Ms. Lee. And Dr. Reed, let me bring it back to you. As a physician, right, what type of support and resources are provided to patients when they're going through cancer treatments?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in addition to having your oncologist, which doesn't change when you're a part of a clinical trial, you really now have access to a clinical research team that follows you closely because, of course, sometimes we're testing new drugs, new ways to do things, so we want to make sure that we're monitoring very closely for side effects, et cetera. In addition, because clinical trials sometimes can lend itself to additional visits, we do have resources for certain clinical trials to help with lodging if you're having to travel from far to access a clinical trial that's not in your neck of the woods. Or you may have some help with vouchers for transport, for meals or for missing work. So there are different resources, and that really differs clinical trial to clinical trial, or even where you're doing your clinical trial. So I always say ask about those resources, because sometimes patients say, well, I'm going to have to take off from work, or this is going to be a trek, but there's sometimes Uber discounts or Uber vouchers, etc. So always ask about what resources is available where you're getting your clinical trial in case you are being out of pocket for additional expenses.
Thank you so much. So very soon we'll open this up to questions from the audience. But before we do so, Dr. Reed, I would like you to offer us a closing remark. What is your hope for the future of cancer care?
Big vision here. When I think about what would I love to see in cancer care, say 5 or 10 years, is really for us to have a treatment that all patients can access, clinical trials that all patients can access, right? That you have a clinical trial available to you in your community and you don't have to travel miles away to get a clinical trial. And that access to care should not depend on my socioeconomic status or race, right? So that is really my hope.
Great. Call to action, actually, for all of us. Thank you. And so what we're hoping to leave our audience with today is the idea that there is a value that we bring to clinical trials. You heard what Ms. Lee said. That drug got approved. She was one of the participants that helped to generate the data to show the safety and effectiveness of that drug. But there's a value as well that clinical trials bring to us. If we were not part of the process in the first place, if that drug was never tested on us, we probably can't be sure that that drug would work for us. So I think that that continuum of need between the value we bring and the value that clinical trials offers a good opportunity for us to ensure that we're encouraging diverse participation in clinical trials. Now, I would love to thank our panelists. You have one more point to share, Ms. Lee? Okay, please go
I
ahead.
wanted to share one more thing. Sometimes when you go into your doctor's office, you and you alone are going to be your best advocate. So if you want something, ask. If you are not feeling, as the previous panelist mentioned, if you're not feeling as if your voice is not being heard, you're not being met where you are, ask. Always, always, always ask questions. And one of the advantages between my relationship between my oncologist and I, that it was so good, was because he always, always, always made the time to answer my questions. And I had a lot of them. But I would see things, I would see articles, and I would tear them out, and I would tab them, and I would bring them to him, and he's like, oh my God. But he would take the time to answer my questions. And if you're not getting your question, make sure you ask questions. And if you're not getting them answered, keep asking them or ask them of somebody else.
Very good point. Thank you. 10 more minutes. Okay, great. So now we'll go to question and answer session. All right, now.
Okay, first question.
Thank you. How do I hold it? Near or far? Just start. Okay.
We have someone over here that has a question. Okay.
Yes. All right. All right. The question I want to ask is, what do you think of clinical trials in radiation oncology?
What do I think about it?
Yes.
I think it's an absolute important part of how we move the field forward in radiation oncology. There are several clinical trials trying to actually, for example, in breast cancer, we're trying to figure out, can we not give everybody radiation? Maybe now we can avoid radiation in certain patients. So for example, where I am at Vanderbilt, we have a clinical trial right now in radiation oncology trying to evaluate whether or not we perhaps can avoid radiation in patients that are over 65, for example. So I think, of course, those results of that trial, hopefully in maybe 5 years, may change how we do radiation for patients. So I think it's an important part for us to understand how we can better treat patients and tailor radiation guidelines for patients.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You can ask your question.
I don't have a question. I just have a statement. I have participated in several clinical trials, and not all clinical trials push drugs or use drugs. So some people are hesitant because of the use of drugs, but not all clinical trials push drugs or give you drugs. So now I participate in several of them, and I'm 72 years old.
Nice, awesome, and thank you for your involvement in clinical trials.
Hello. First of all, I want to say thank you to the panel for giving this documented information to our community that we need so much. What I'd like to say is, what do we do in the Black and brown community? I understand that cancer is sometimes hereditary, sometimes you cannot help it. But what do we do in the Black and brown communities to educate on how we eat? I understand a lot of times, my mother ate this, my grandmother ate this, da-da-da-da. How do we, because you know all the food nowadays is pretty tainted anyhow, even the vegetables. But how can we go about educating the Black and brown community on better ways to feed themselves in order to prevent some of these diseases?
I think that's an excellent question. And what I would say to that is start young. So I have a 9-year-old, and we have those conversations from now on best practices and how to eat, making sure you're staying active, eating your fruits and vegetables, right? Avoiding certain heavy red meat diets. So I think really making it a way of life in our community, it's going to take time because we have done it the wrong way for so long. So I think really, even when the kids are small, not making fast food the go-to, right? Taking it back to the table in the evenings, home cooked meals. So I think it's going to take time to change the tide, but I think we really have to start young with really changing that mindset, keeping the kids active, because then when they grow older, they'll value more exercise and they'll value more healthy eating habits.
Hello. First of all, I would like to just say thank you to Black Health Matters for doing this conference. I came all the way from Connecticut for this specifically because we don't have anything like this going on in Connecticut. I've been a nurse for 23 years, but I also lost my mom to breast cancer at 29, diagnosed at 23. So my question for you is, although because of colonization and mixed cultures, we know who we are, but we don't know who we are. And as far as genetics go, someone looks at me, they see a Black woman, they look at my last name, Santos, they think I'm Hispanic. They look at my birth certificate, my race says white, because I am Ashkenazi, Sephardic, and an Israelite, i.e. why my mom died of breast cancer, her father prostate, her mother bone, my cousin has bile duct, colon, every cancer you could think of is in my family. So as a nurse, I know what my rights are, and I know to talk about my family background, but a lot of people don't know it. What do you guys think about actually having genetic testing that may qualify more people for trials?
All right. So I'm so glad you asked that question, and thank you for sharing your story with us. What we are realizing right now is that genetic testing is playing a critical role in identifying precision medicine, meaning the medicine that would target exactly the source of the cancer. And so we actually advocate and encourage people to get the right screening test, right? And sometimes when you get diagnosed with a particular type of cancer, then they follow it up with a biomarker test, with some genetic tests, so they can really identify the SARS and then be able to identify the right medication. Now, in the world of those of us in the industry, that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to find the right therapy for the right person at the right time. And genetic testing is one of the tools that's helping us to identify the right medication that can achieve that goal.
Here you go.
Hi there. I'd like to ask a question about how we as a community advocate for inclusion in terms of how do we because unlike the lawyer who was able to advocate for herself and know how to look for information, how do I as an ordinary person be able to find information about getting tested and being retested?
I mean, that speaks to my heart, definitely, because I think vulnerable patients, of course, always will stay at this, I would say, be outside of the ring, if you may. And I think what you really want to do is include yourself in venues like this, right? Education. So an opportunity like Black Health Matters right now, where we're being fed with information on guidelines, may make, if you or a family member should show up to a doctor's office maybe in a year or two, it may, ring a bell like, hold on a second, I never heard about clinical trials. Is it that you're forgetting to mention it, or do I qualify, right? So just having that information in the back of your head when you go to these different venues may be one tool. But again, sometimes you may not have an opportunity to know what to ask. So I would always say really just surrounding yourself with a team. So your healthcare team sometimes is your best advocate, right? And if you're engaging with an oncologist or a surgeon that you don't think really have your best interests at heart, or you don't just trust that sharing everything, it may mean getting a second opinion just to see what else is out there. I always say you really have to feel comfortable with the team that you're getting your care from, because that's really how you're going to really feel comfortable that I'm getting all that I deserve, so to speak.
Thanks, and we have one last question.
She said something I didn't hear. Yes.
Did I say?
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for sharing. My brother, he just was diagnosed with cancer, and he's 65, but thank goodness it came like in the first stage. And you should be more scared not to go to the hospital then, because you wait to the end. I notice people with stage 4, it's more work to do, and you got to go to the hospital more and take more medicine, opposed to being in stage 1. And now his chemo his cancer has gone down some, because he was only have like stage 1. And thank you so much for sharing on this topic, because Black people, we and other people too, think that we Superman, Superwoman. No, we got inside liver, kidneys, and stuff like that you got to take care. And I tell them to drink water. I'm the water queen. They be like, oh, you go, I now drink water. That's right. Because water is part of the body. You have to, they say 8 glasses, but some people don't even have 1 glass, So, and you got to put water in your body because to cleanse your kidneys and liver and stuff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon to each and everyone in the room, and to the panel. I'm grateful for you, for the knowledge that you have shared with us. My question is, do you believe because of the social and the other factors that in neighborhoods of brown and Black folk, that we get less because of the zip code that we are living in? We don't get the same things that other zip codes get. For me, I'm in a clinical trial now, and I'm only in that trial because I was nosy and I wanted to know what was going on, and I asked a lot of questions. I'm with the Neurological Institute at New York Presbyterian Hospital, and just last week, I did a brain scan. Prior to the brain scan, I did a cognitive test. It was a 4-hour test. And the doctors that gave the test were so amazed because I could remember everything that they said and the order that it was said in. And even if they switched it up, I could still remember. So they said, okay, well, she did well. Let's do her brain. I did the scan on last week. I haven't gotten back my results yet. But I believe because I was nosy and I wanted to know what was going on, that I have the opportunity to know if there's anything that's going on with me on the cognitive level. I could be aware of it and I can get the help that I need. I can seek out other areas and other trials, but I just believe because of the zip code that we don't get what we rightfully deserve. There's an impartiality where we live is based on. And just to say this, in the South Bronx, where all the film is in the Hunts Point area of the South Bronx, they have the highest rate of asthma. I was a product of the South Bronx. I didn't have asthma, but there are so many people that have asthma because of the fumes, and I believe that if the powers that be and the government was to come through the neighborhoods and sweep, we would get much better results.
Thank you so much. A wonderful way for us to end the segment, because what it says, you're right. Part of the social determinant of health is really where we live, right? And what we have access to. And we need to start figuring out one thing: how do we ask the right questions? Miss Lee said she asked questions, right? You asked questions as well. And if there's anything I would like to leave us with today, please, in your interaction with family members, with friends, continue to encourage them. If you have any diagnosis or any questions around cancer screening, please ask the questions. If you actually happen to be diagnosed with cancer and your doctor hasn't said anything about a clinical trial, ask about that as well, because a clinical trial could as well be a treatment option for many of our patients. So please continue to ask. Thank you so much for this time. We appreciate you.
Okay, ladies.